In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where 1,000 civilizations had risen and fallen across millennia, there existed a truth that every species learned too late. When the universe itself cries out for salvation, it doesn't ask for the wise, the ancient, or the powerful. It asks for the stubborn. For 300 years, the Galactic Concord had maintained peace through careful diplomacy, advanced technology, and the collective wisdom of races that had mastered interstellar travel before humanity had even discovered fire. The Zephyrians, with their crystalline intellect spanning centuries. The Korath Collective, whose hive minds could process information faster than quantum computers. The ethereal veil walkers who existed partially in dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. All of them, every single one, had said no. When the Devourers emerged from the space between spaces, when reality itself began to unravel at the edges of known space, when entire star systems simply stopped existing, the galaxy's greatest minds calculated the odds. They ran simulations, they held councils, they debated, and they concluded that resistance was mathematically impossible. But mathematics, as humanity would soon prove, had never met a species too stupid to know when they were beaten. The distress signal that reached Earth was never meant for human ears. It was a final desperate plea broadcast across all known frequencies, a cosmic scream into the void. The message was simple: the galaxy is dying. We need champions. We need heroes. We need someone crazy enough to fight the unfightable. What the dying civilizations didn't know was that they had just issued a challenge to the one species in the galaxy that heard impossible and thought, hold my beer, but because when the universe needed someone to stand up to cosmic horrors that made gods tremble, humans looked at the odds, shrugged, and asked the most dangerous question in any language: yeah, but what if we tried anyway? Commander Sarah Chen had been monitoring deep space communications for 12 years, and in all that time, she had never heard the universe scream. The sound that erupted from the speakers at the Luna Deep Space Monitoring Station wasn't quite audio. It existed somewhere between electromagnetic radiation and something that made her teeth ache. Every instrument on the station lit up like a Christmas tree, readings spiking into ranges that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah's coffee mug vibrated off her desk, shattering on the metal floor, but she barely noticed. Her entire focus was locked on the cascade of data flooding her screens. "Chen to Earth Control," she whispered into her headset, her voice barely audible over the growing cacophony of alarms. "We're receiving something on all frequencies. I repeat, all frequencies. This isn't possible." The voice that responded from Earth was calm, professional. "Luna Station, please clarify. You mean multiple frequencies?" Sarah's hands flew over her console, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "I mean every frequency: radio, microwave, quantum entanglement, gravitational waves, even some spectrums we don't have names for. Whatever's transmitting this is using methods of communication we haven't discovered yet. Not any human language, but patterns that suggested intelligence, structure, meaning." Her computer's translation algorithms went into overdrive, comparing syntax and mathematical relationships, searching for common ground between human understanding and alien thought. Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's xenolinguistics specialist, stumbled into the communications bay, his hair disheveled from sleep. "Sarah, what the hell is that noise?" "It woke me up 3 levels down." "First contact," she said simply, never taking her eyes off the screen. "And I think they're terrified." As the computer worked its translation magic, fragments of meaning began to emerge. Words appeared on the screen, replacing alien symbols with rough human approximations. Emergency, galactic, dying, need help, champions, heroes. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, reading the partial translation. "This can't be right. Are they asking for help?" The translation algorithm finished its primary pass, and suddenly the message became crystal clear. A synthetic voice, built from hundreds of overlapping alien languages, began to speak from the station's speakers. "To any civilization capable of receiving this transmission, we send our final plea. We are the Galactic Concord, representing 473 member species across the Andromeda Spiral. Our galaxy is under attack by entities that exist beyond conventional understanding of reality. We have designated them as devourers for their ability to consume not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself. 12 star systems have been removed from reality, not destroyed, removed. They no longer exist and have never existed. The devourers advance through our galaxy like a wave of unbeing, and our greatest weapons, our most advanced technologies, our most brilliant minds have all concluded the same thing. Resistance is impossible. We broadcast this message not because we expect aid, but because extinction demands witness. We are the last of the great powers. The Zephyrian Empire, with technology that could reshape matter at the quantum level, has withdrawn to their core worlds to await the end. The Korath Collective, with computational power that rivals stars, has calculated their own defeat with mathematical certainty. The Veil Walkers have retreated to dimensions beyond physical reality, hoping distance might save them. All have abandoned hope. But if there exists anywhere in this universe a species foolish enough to stand against the inevitable, noble enough to fight the unfightable, we offer coordinates to our remaining forces. We offer alliance with those brave enough to join us in our final stand. We do not expect an answer. We broadcast this knowing that wisdom dictates silence, that intelligence demands survival over heroism. But if there are those who would rather burn out in glorious defiance than fade away in careful hiding, we will welcome you to our doomed cause. This is the final transmission of the Galactic Concord. To whoever receives this, remember us. Remember that we tried. Silence filled the communications bay. Sarah stared at the screen where star charts and galactic coordinates scrolled past like a grocery list of dying worlds. Marcus had gone pale, his hands gripping the back of her chair. They're asking us to fly across the galaxy to fight cosmic horrors that erase things from existence, Marcus whispered. And they don't even expect us to be stupid enough to say yes. Sarah looked at the coordinates, calculating distances that would require technology humanity didn't possess, journeys that would take lifetimes with their current capabilities. She thought about the casual way the message had mentioned the erasure of entire star systems, the matter-of-fact tone when describing enemies that could delete reality itself. Any sane person would file a report, let the politicians and scientists figure out what to do with this information, and hope that whatever was happening in Andromeda stayed in Andromeda. Sarah Chen had never claimed to be sane. She opened a channel to Earth Control. Earth Control, this is Luna Station. Patch me through to Director Harrison immediately. Priority Alpha clearance. Sarah. Marcus grabbed her arm.
You can't be serious. They said it themselves. This is a suicide mission.
Every advanced civilization in their galaxy has given up. What makes you think humanity can do anything they can't? Sarah looked at him with a grin that would have made her ancestors proud, the same grin worn by humans who had charged machine gun nests, climbed impossible mountains, and sailed into uncharted oceans just to see what was there. Maybe that's exactly why we can help, she said. They're all too smart to try. We're too stupid to quit. Within 6 hours, the message had reached every major world leader on Earth. Within 12 hours, emergency sessions were being held at the United Nations, the European Space Coalition, and every other political body that had ever dreamed of representing humanity among the stars. The debates were predictably chaotic. Scientists declared the mission impossible. Politicians worried about the cost. Military leaders questioned the wisdom of involving Earth in an alien war. Religious figures argued about humanity's duty to help versus their obligation to survive. But in a small conference room at CERN, Dr. Elena Vasquez was having a very different conversation with her team of theoretical physicists. The fold drive? Dr. James Morrison shook his head. Elena, we've been working on spatial folding for 15 years. The energy requirements alone would need the output of a star. What if we didn't need to sustain it? Elena pulled up holographic equations, mathematical representations of space-time that hurt to look at directly. Look at their message again. They're broadcasting across impossible distances using quantum entanglement and gravitational wave manipulation. If we can reverse engineer even a fraction of their communication technology, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the youngest member of the team, leaned forward. You're talking about building a ship that could make the journey, but even if we could reach them, what then? They said their most advanced weapons are useless. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. Their most advanced weapons were designed by civilizations that never learned to fight dirty. They're used to elegant solutions, logical warfare, technological superiority. She gestured to the window where Earth hung blue and white in the darkness. What do you think happens when you introduce something completely illogical to a logical problem? Exactly. Beautiful, unpredictable, utterly human chaos. Across the globe, similar conversations were taking place. In underground military bunkers, generals were dusting off contingency plans that had never expected to be used beyond Earth's atmosphere. In research facilities, engineers were pulling all-nighters to design ships that could carry not just humans, but human stubbornness across the galaxy. President Martinez stood before the United Nations General Assembly 3 days after the message was received. The hall was packed with representatives from every nation on Earth and observers linked in from colonies on Mars and Europa. Fellow humans, she began, her voice carrying to billions of listeners worldwide. We have been asked to do something that every rational species in the galaxy has deemed impossible. We have been invited to fight enemies that can erase reality itself, to stand beside aliens who have already accepted their defeat, to travel distances that strain the very concept of distance. She paused, looking out over the assembly. Every logical argument says we should refuse. Every computer model predicts our failure. Every simulation shows that we would be throwing human lives away for a cause that cannot be won. In the silence, she could hear the quiet hum of the translation systems, carrying her words to listeners who spoke 100 different human languages. But I stand before you today to propose something that no computer could calculate, that no simulation could predict. I propose that we answer their call not because we can win, but because someone should try. Not because we have the technology, but because we have the will to build it. Not because we are heroes, but because the galaxy needs heroes, and sometimes the only heroes available are the ones too stubborn to recognize when they're beaten. The vote was closer than the history books would record. There were passionate speeches about humanity's responsibility to itself, about the dangers of getting involved in conflicts beyond Earth's understanding. There were practical concerns about resources, technology, and the very real possibility that humanity might be inviting destruction upon itself. But in the end, the decision came down to something that had driven human progress for millennia: curiosity mixed with defiance. The universe had presented them with a problem and claimed it was unsolvable. Humans had always been terrible at accepting that kind of limitation. The resolution passed by a margin of 8 votes. Earth would answer the call. Humanity would build ships capable of crossing the galaxy, would gather volunteers willing to fight cosmic horrors, would stand with alien civilizations that had already given up hope. They would do this not because they expected to win, but because losing while fighting was better than losing while hiding. As Sarah Chen watched the vote results scroll across her screen at Luna Station, she felt a familiar sensation. The same feeling her species had experienced when they first looked up at the moon and decided they belonged there, when they saw the ocean's horizon and decided to cross it, when they encountered problems that couldn't be solved and decided to solve them anyway. It was the feeling of being magnificently, stubbornly, gloriously human. She opened a new transmission channel broadcasting back along the same impossible frequencies that had brought the alien distress call to Earth. Her message was simple, but it would echo across the galaxy with the force of an entire species refusing to accept the inevitable. We received your message, we accept your invitation. We're coming to help, and we're bringing everything we've got. She paused, then added with a grin that somehow made it into her voice, fair warning. We've never been very good at knowing when to quit. Hope that's what you're looking for in an ally. Across the galaxy, in the failing capital ships of a dozen dying civilizations, alien commanders who had spent months preparing for extinction received a transmission they had never expected to hear. An unknown species from a world so far away their star charts didn't even include its galaxy had heard their call for help and decided to answer it. The age of heroes, it seemed, was not yet over. It had simply been waiting for the right species to arrive. 6 months after humanity's answer echoed across the galaxy, the Sahara Desert had been transformed into the largest construction site in human history. Where once there had been sand and silence, now there stood a sprawling complex of launch towers, assembly bays, and research facilities that stretched to the horizon. The project had been given a name that captured both its ambition and its absurdity: Operation Quixote. Captain Marcus Tank Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of Assembly Bay 1, watching teams of engineers and technicians swarm over the hull of the UES Defiance like ants building something far too large for their size. The ship was beautiful in the way that purely functional things could be beautiful. Every line and curve served a purpose. Every surface was covered with weapon systems, shield generators, and the experimental fold drive that would either carry humanity to glory or vaporize them in the attempt. "Still can't believe they're actually building these things," said Dr. Sarah Chen, joining him at the railing. She had been promoted to Chief of Interstellar Communications after her role in First Contact, but she still preferred to be called Sarah. 5 ships, Tank mused, counting them off as he looked across the complex. 5 ships to take on an enemy that's defeated entire galactic civilizations. Either we're the most optimistic species in the universe, or the most deluded. Why not both? They watched as a crew guided a massive weapons array into position on the Defiance's dorsal section. The weapon was unlike anything in humanity's current arsenal, a hybrid system that combined human ingenuity with reverse-engineered alien technology from the Galactic Concord's transmitted data files. The aliens had included complete technical specifications for their most advanced systems, along with detailed analyses of why those systems had failed against the Devourers. That was the kind of gift only a dying civilization could give. The complete record of their failures offered freely to anyone foolish enough to try again. Dr. Pixon sat down. Elena Vasquez emerged from the elevator behind them, her hair even wilder than usual and her lab coat stained with coffee and what might have been engine grease. She had barely slept in 6 months, dedicating every waking moment to solving the theoretical problems that kept Operation Quixote from being complete suicide. "How's the fold drive looking?" Sarah asked. Elena rubbed her eyes, like a controlled explosion wrapped in mathematics and prayer. "We've managed to create stable folding fields in laboratory conditions, but scaling it up to move something the size of a battleship," she shrugged. "The good news is that our simulations show a 60% chance of arriving at our destination intact. And the bad news? The bad news is that those odds are better than anything the Galactic Concorde ever achieved with their transportation technology. Which means we're either making a breakthrough or we're about to become a very expensive fireworks display. What do we know about the crews? I've been so focused on ship construction I haven't kept up with personnel selection." Sarah pulled out her tablet, scrolling through files. "It's probably the most unusual military recruitment in history. We put out a call for volunteers, made it clear this was a one-way mission with minimal chances of survival, and got over 2 million applications."
2 million? Elena looked surprised.
"I knew there was interest, but that's 1% of the planet's military-age population," Tank finished. "Every Special Forces operator who ever wanted to test themselves against impossible odds. Every pilot who dreamed of flying ships that don't exist yet. Every scientist who wanted to study alien technology firsthand. Every ordinary person who heard about cosmic horrors and thought, yeah, I want to punch those in the face." The psychological evaluation teams had to create entirely new categories. Standard psychological profiles don't have classifications for suicidally optimistic or aggressively curious. We had to turn away volunteers who were too sane. The selection process had been grueling, not just physically but mentally. How do you choose someone for a mission that requires both the intelligence to understand advanced alien technology and the sheer bloody-mindedness to charge into battle against entities that could erase you from existence? The answer, it turned out, was to look for people who heard impossible as a personal challenge. The 5 ships of humanity's first interstellar war fleet each had a crew of 2,000. 10,000 humans carrying with them the hopes and prayers and sheer stubborn defiance of an entire species. They came from every nation, every background, every possible human experience. Former pirates worked alongside former priests. Corporate executives served next to kindergarten teachers who had joined up because someone needed to fight the monsters. Commander Janet Stone, captain of the flagship UES Defiance, had been selected not just for her tactical brilliance, but for her ability to look at a problem that had defeated civilizations far older than humanity and respond with, "Okay, but what if we tried it backwards?" Had left her position as a theoretical physicist at CERN to serve as the fleet science officer. When asked why she had volunteered for what amounted to an elaborate form of suicide, she had simply said, "Someone needs to take notes while we're making history." Chief Engineer Roberto Santos had volunteered after reading the technical specifications of the Devourer entities. His report to the recruitment board consisted of a single sentence: "I want to see what makes those bastards tick, and then I want to break it." Amanda Price, the fleet's chief medical officer, had joined for reasons that were both simpler and more complex than the others. Someone's going to get hurt fighting cosmic horrors. Might as well be someone good at fixing people. The recruitment had produced stories that would become legend. There was Private Kim Walsh, a mechanic from Detroit who had volunteered specifically because the mission brief mentioned that conventional tactics had failed. "If conventional tactics don't work," she had written in her application, "then maybe it's time for some unconventional tactics. I know 300 ways to break things that shouldn't be broken. Figure that might come in handy." Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a former drill instructor, had joined because she was curious to see if cosmic horrors could be motivated by harsh language and aggressive encouragement. Her psychological evaluation had simply read, "Unclear whether she believes she can yell the Devourers to death or if she just wants to try." The technical challenges had been as daunting as the personnel ones. Humanity's most advanced ships could barely reach the outer edges of their solar system, yet they needed to build vessels capable of crossing the galaxy and surviving battles against enemies that existing physics couldn't fully describe. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Raj Patel, a programmer who had spent years designing combat AI for virtual reality games, had approached the fleet engineering team with a proposal that sounded insane even by Operation Quixote standards. Instead of trying to create ships that could match alien technology, why not create ships that could adapt to alien technology? His solution was to design vessels with modular systems that could be reconfigured in real time based on battlefield conditions. If conventional weapons failed, the ships could instantly reconfigure their systems to try something else. If traditional shields proved useless, they could adapt their defensive systems to whatever actually worked. "It's like building a ship that can rebuild itself in the middle of a fight," he had explained to the skeptical engineering committee. "We're not trying to predict what will work against the Devourers. We're building ships that can experiment until they find what works." The concept had required advances in artificial intelligence that pushed humanity's technology decades beyond its current level. Each ship would be equipped with an AI system capable of redesigning its own hardware in real time, guided by learning algorithms that could adapt to completely unknown threats. The AIs themselves had been another challenge. How do you program artificial intelligence to fight enemies that conventional intelligence couldn't understand? The answer had been to not program them with conventional intelligence at all. Dr. Lisa Chen, Sarah's sister and a specialist in evolutionary computing, had proposed creating AIs based not on logical decision-making, but on the kind of chaotic creativity that had driven human innovation for millennia. The ship AIs would be designed to be curious, stubborn, and just a little bit crazy. "We're not building computers," she had explained. "We're building artificial humans, complete with the ability to look at impossible situations and think, yeah, but what if I tried this really stupid thing I just thought of?" Conventional weapons had proved useless against the Devourers, so humanity had been forced to think unconventionally. The ships carried traditional armaments, railguns, plasma cannons, nuclear missiles, but they also carried weapons that existed only in theory. There were reality anchors designed to prevent localized existence from being erased, quantum disruptors that could theoretically interfere with entities that existed partially outside normal spacetime, consciousness bombs that targeted the thought patterns of entities that might not have traditional matter-based biology. Most unusual of all were the humanity bombs, devices that projected concentrated doses of human stubbornness and illogical determination in the hope that exposing cosmic horrors to pure human obstinacy might have some kind of effect. The theory, Dr. Vasquez had explained to a room full of skeptical scientists, is that the devourers are entities of pure logic and inevitability. What happens when something that operates on absolute logical certainty encounters something that operates on emotional defiance and the refusal to accept reality? It sounds like you're trying to defeat cosmic horrors with the power of positive thinking. I'm trying to defeat cosmic horrors with the power of negative thinking, actually. The absolute refusal to accept that something can't be done. Now, 6 months after construction had begun, the first ship was nearly ready for its maiden voyage. The UES Defiance would carry 2,000 volunteers on a journey of impossible distance to fight an enemy of unimaginable power, armed with weapons that barely existed and protected by shields that shouldn't work. Tank watched as the last of the primary weapons arrays was installed, massive systems that gleamed with alien technology and human craftsmanship. You know what the strangest part of this whole thing is? We're probably going to die, all of us. There's a very good chance that these ships will fold space wrong and scatter our atoms across the galaxy before we even reach the war zone. And if we do reach it, we'll be fighting things that have already defeated civilizations with technology we can barely understand. Elena nodded. Your point? Tank grinned, the expression transforming his weathered face. My point is that I've never been more excited about anything in my life. We're about to attempt something that every rational species has declared impossible. In ships we built in 6 months using technology we barely understand, with crew members who volunteered specifically because the mission was probably suicidal. He gestured toward the Defiance, where engineers were running final systems checks on equipment that would either save the galaxy or provide a very expensive lesson in the limits of human optimism. Look at that ship and tell me we're not the perfect species to fight cosmic horrors. We're so irrationally determined to help that we built an interstellar war fleet without knowing if it would work. What cosmic horror is prepared for that level of commitment to a bad idea? When you put it like that, I almost feel sorry for the devourers. They're about to encounter their first species that looks at mathematical impossibility and treats it as a personal challenge. The communication system crackled to life, carrying the voice of Commander Stone from the Defiance's bridge. All stations, this is the Defiance's primary systems are green across the board. Full drive is stable and ready for initial testing. All crew members report to stations for final pre-departure checks. Elena checked her chronometer. First test of the full drive in 30 minutes. If this works, we'll be able to make the journey to the Galactic Concord in weeks instead of centuries. Then we'll have proven that faster-than-light travel is impossible by becoming a very brief but spectacular example of what happens when matter encounters a folding space-time field incorrectly, where 5 impossible ships sat ready to carry humanity into its first interstellar war, ships built from stubborn optimism and the refusal to accept that some problems couldn't be solved by enough determination and firepower. Either way, she said, we're about to make history. The question is whether we'll be around to read about it afterward. The ships of Operation Quixote were more than vessels of war. They were monuments to humanity's greatest strength and greatest weakness. The absolute conviction that impossible problems were just problems that hadn't been solved yet. They carried not just weapons and crew, but the concentrated essence of human stubbornness, the distilled refusal to accept defeat until every possible option had been tried and several impossible ones had been attempted. In 30 minutes, they would find out if the universe was ready for that level of commitment to a cause that couldn't be won. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations that had accepted their defeat detected the unusual energy signatures of humanity's experimental fold drives powering up for the first time. They watched their instruments with curiosity and hope, wondering if the impossible species that had answered their call for help might actually be crazy enough to succeed where logic had failed. The universe, it seemed, was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an unmovable stupidity. The first human ship to successfully fold space did so with all the grace and dignity of a drunk elephant attempting ballet. Commander Janet Stone watched the readings on her bridge displays with the calm detachment that had made her the perfect choice to captain humanity's flagship. Around her, the crew of the UES Defiance held their breath as their ship attempted something that should have been impossible with technology they barely understood. "Fold drive at 30% power," reported Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka from the science station, her voice steady despite the fact that they were about to either make history or become a very brief footnote in it. "Spatial distortion field. Well, it's definitely distorting space." "Define definitely," Stone said, never taking her eyes off the tactical display where local space was doing things that hurt to look at directly. "We appear to be convincing reality that we're in two places at once, which is either exactly what we wanted or the prelude to a very educational explosion." Chief Engineer Roberto Santos spoke up from his station where alarms were blinking in patterns that resembled a particularly festive Christmas tree. "Ma'am, I've got good news and bad news about the fold drive. Give me the bad news first." "The bad news is that our fold drive is operating completely outside the parameters of known physics. The energy patterns don't match any of our simulations. The spatial distortions are producing effects we didn't predict, and according to my instruments, we're currently existing in 17 dimensions simultaneously." "And the good news? The good news is that it seems to be working anyway." Through the viewports, the stars had begun to shift. Not move exactly, but change in ways that human perception wasn't equipped to process. Space folded around them like origami made of light and gravity, bringing distant points closer while somehow leaving everything else exactly where it had been. "Fold completion in 10 seconds, Tanaka announced. 9, 8, 7, 6... The universe turned itself inside out. For a moment that lasted either no time at all or several eternities, every member of the Defiance crew experienced what it felt like to exist everywhere at once. They were simultaneously in orbit around Earth and halfway across the galaxy, occupying every point between their origin and destination while somehow remaining exactly where they had always been. Then reality snapped back into focus with an almost audible pop and they were somewhere else entirely. "Fold drive shutdown complete," Santos reported, his voice slightly hoarse. "All systems nominal," which I find deeply disturbing given that they shouldn't be. Stone looked at the main view screen, where an alien solar system spread out before them in impossible beauty. 3 suns of different colors painted space in hues that had no names, while planets that looked like works of art orbited in patterns that suggested intelligence behind their design. "Navigation confirms successful fold jump," Tanaka said, checking her instruments with the careful precision of someone who wasn't quite ready to believe what she was seeing. "We are now in the Zephyrian system, approximately 4,000 light-years from Earth. Travel time, 12 minutes and 37 seconds. 12 minutes, Stone repeated softly. To travel 4,000 light-years. She stood up from her command chair, looking out at an alien sky that proved humanity had just successfully told the laws of physics to sit down and shut up. Dr. Vasquez is either going to be insufferably smug about this, or we're all hallucinating our deaths and don't know it yet. The communication station erupted in activity as alien signals filled the frequencies, voices speaking in languages that had been old when Earth was young. The ship's translation systems worked frantically to convert the streams of data into something approaching human comprehension. "Ma'am," Communications Officer Lisa Park called out, her voice tight with excitement, "I'm receiving multiple hails from the Galactic Concord fleet. They seem surprised we're here. Surprised good or surprised bad?" Surprised? How the hell did you build functional fold drives in 6 months when it took us 6 centuries? Kind of surprised. The expression carrying all the confidence of a species that had gotten this far by being too stubborn to recognize when they were attempting the impossible. Put me through to their fleet commander. The main screen flickered, then resolved into an image that made several crew members gasp. The being looking back at them was clearly not human, but there was something almost familiar about them. Crystalline features that caught and reflected light in patterns that suggested deep intelligence, eyes that held the weight of centuries, and an expression that somehow conveyed both hope and disbelief. "This is Fleet Commander Zarthus of the Galactic Concord," the being said, their voice carrying harmonics that the translation system rendered as formal authority tinged with exhaustion. We did not expect to see any response to our transmission, let alone ships capable of reaching us so quickly. How did you develop fold drive technology in such a short time? Number 1. Input on her best diplomatic smile. Commander Zarthus, this is Commander Janet Stone of the Earth vessel UES Defiance, representing the Human Defense Fleet. As for how we developed fold drives so quickly, she paused, considering how to explain humanity's approach to impossible engineering problems. We had really good motivation. Zarthus's crystalline features shifted in what might have been confusion. Motivation? I do not understand. Fold drive technology requires centuries of research, precise mathematical calculations, understanding of 17 different fields of advanced physics. We're not really good at letting mathematical impossibilities stop us when something needs doing. We received your distress call, figured out that you needed help, and decided that we'd work out the details along the way. You decided? The alien commander's voice rose slightly. You decided to overcome mathematical certainties through decision. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka leaned forward. Commander Zarthus, may I ask what your projections showed for the development time of fold drive technology? Based on your species' current technological level as indicated by your communication methods, our calculations suggested a minimum development time of 400 years. Assuming optimal resource allocation and no significant setbacks. And you broadcast your message 6 months ago? Correct. We never expected, Zarthus paused, seeming to struggle with concepts that didn't fit their understanding of reality. Are you saying that your species developed functional interstellar transportation technology specifically to respond to our request for aid? Among other things. We also built 5 ships capable of carrying 10,000 personnel, developed new weapons systems, created AI specifically designed to adapt to unknown threats, and convinced 10,000 volunteers to leave everything they've ever known to help fight cosmic horrors they've never seen. The silence that followed this statement stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. You built ships, Zarthus said slowly, developed technology and recruited military forces for the specific purpose of helping strangers in a galaxy you have never visited fight an enemy you know nothing about. That's a fair summary, yes. Why? The question was asked with the kind of profound confusion that suggested Zarthus was encountering a concept so foreign to their experience that they lacked the framework to understand it. It was the tone of someone trying to comprehend a mathematics that operated on completely different principles. Stone considered the question seriously. It was, she realized, probably the most important question humanity would ever be asked. How do you explain to an ancient civilization that your species had just performed miracles of engineering and logistics because someone somewhere needed help? Because, she said finally, when someone asks for help, you help, even if it's impossible, even if it's dangerous, even if you don't know how to do it yet. She paused, looking at the alien commander who represented civilizations older and wiser than her own. Maybe especially then. Zarthus stared at her for a long moment, their crystalline features reflecting light in patterns that suggested deep thought. Your species, you voluntarily chose to attempt the impossible because we asked for assistance. We voluntarily chose to attempt the impossible because you needed assistance. There's a difference. See, the alien commander's voice carried a note that the translation system couldn't quite capture, something between wonder and disbelief. Commander Stone, I must warn you, the enemy we face is not like anything in conventional understanding. The Devourers exist partially outside reality itself. They do not simply destroy worlds, they unmake them, erase them from the fundamental structure of existence. Every weapon we have deployed against them has failed. Every tactic we have attempted has proven useless. Stone nodded seriously. Understood. What specific capabilities have you tried? Reality anchors that can stabilize local space-time. Quantum disruptors that can unmake matter at the subatomic level. Consciousness weapons that attack the concept of thought itself. Zarthes's voice grew more strained with each item on the list. All have failed. The Devourers adapt to our attacks, learn from our strategies, and continue their advance. Interesting, Stone mused. And these are your most advanced weapons? They are the culmination of millions of years of scientific advancement across hundreds of species. Right, and they're all based on advanced understanding of physics and logical tactical thinking? Of course. How else would one design weapons? Stone's smile turned predatory, carrying all the confidence of a species that had gotten this far by refusing to let logic get in the way of necessity. Commander Zarthes, I think you're about to learn something new about warfare. See, all your weapons and tactics are based on the assumption that your enemy is operating within the same logical framework you are. Is there any other framework? Oh yes, Stone said, her voice carrying the promise of chaos that had driven human progress for millennia. There's the framework of trying random stuff until something works, the framework of doing things because they might help rather than because they should work. The framework of looking at an enemy that adapts to logical attacks and thinking, I wonder what happens if we try something completely illogical. She gestured to the tactical display where the positions of human and alien fleets were beginning to merge into a single formation. Commander, your civilizations have failed against the Devourers because you've been fighting them with science and logic. We're going to try fighting them with creativity and stubbornness. I do not understand the tactical applications of stubbornness. You're about to. Our ships are equipped with weapons systems based not on proven physics but on theoretical physics that we're not even sure works. Our AIs are programmed not to follow logical decision trees but to try whatever seems interesting at the moment. Our crew members have been specifically selected for their ability to look at impossible odds and think, yeah, but what if I try anyway? Zarthes was quiet for a long moment, processing concepts that apparently had no equivalent in their language or experience. You are saying that your entire military strategy is based on unpredictability. Among other things, we're also banking heavily on the power of getting really, really angry at things that hurt people we've decided to protect. Stone's expression grew serious. Commander, you've been fighting these Devourers with the assumption that they can be defeated through superior technology and logical tactics. What if the answer isn't to be better than them, but to be different from them in ways they can't predict or adapt to? That is, Zarthes paused, their crystalline features shifting as they processed the concept. That is, Zarthes paused, their crystalline features shifting as they processed the concept. That is, which is exactly why it might work. The communication was interrupted by urgent alerts from both ship sensor stations. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka checked her instruments, her expression growing grim. Ma'am, I'm detecting massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system, energy signatures that match the Devourer patterns from the Concord database. Zarthes's image flickered as their ship went to combat alert. 3 Devourer entities approaching at superluminal velocity. All ships prepare for engagement. This may be our final battle. Stone looked at her crew, seeing excitement rather than fear in their faces. These were people who had volunteered to travel impossible distances to fight impossible enemies, and now they were about to find out if their impossible solutions actually worked. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the ship's communication system. We came here to help fight cosmic horrors, and it looks like they've decided to save us the trouble of finding them. Weapons are free, creativity is encouraged, and remember, we're not trying to be better than them. were trying to be so completely different from everything they've faced that they don't know how to respond. She turned back to the screen where Zarthus waited. Commander, prepare to see what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable stupidity. And fair warning, we have absolutely no idea if any of this is going to work, but we're about to try it with great enthusiasm. For the first time since the conversation began, Zarthus's expression suggested something that might have been hope. In that case, Commander Stone, the alien said, "Welcome to the war. May your unpredictability serve you better than our logic has served us." On the edge of the system, 3 tiers in reality began to spread, and through them came entities that existed beyond conventional understanding. The Devourers had arrived, expecting to face the same advanced but predictable civilizations they had defeated before. They were about to encounter their first species that looked at predictability as a personal insult. The first thing that became apparent about fighting cosmic horrors was that they didn't look like anything the human brain was equipped to process. The Devourers emerged from tiers in space-time that hurt to look at directly, their forms shifting between dimensions in ways that made veteran spacefighters reach for motion sickness medications. They weren't ships in any conventional sense, but rather traveling holes in reality that happened to be shaped like something that might once have been geometric before geometry got sad and gave up. "Tactical analysis," Commander Stone called out, watching her sensors try and fail to make sense of what they were detecting. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka stared at her instruments with the expression of someone whose education had not prepared her for entities that registered as negative mass. "Ma'am, the computer is having an existential crisis. Whatever these things are, they don't conform to any known physics. The sensors keep trying to measure them and coming back with results like yes and the color of Tuesday. Are they threatening? Well, they're erasing local space-time as they move, so I'm going to go with probably not here for a friendly chat." Chief Engineer Santos's voice came over the comm from the engine room, carrying the tone of someone who was either terrified or excited, possibly both. "Captain, the fold drive is detecting something I've never seen before. These things, they're not just moving through space, they're convincing space that it never existed in the first place." On the main screen, the combined Galactic Concord fleet was taking up defensive positions with the precision of civilizations that had been fighting losing battles for months. Their ships moved in perfect formations, weapons powered and shields raised, executing maneuvers that spoke of thousands of years of tactical evolution. Commander Zarthus's voice came through the communication link, carrying the weight of too many defeats. "Human vessels, we recommend you maintain position behind our main battle line. The Devourers will focus their initial attack on our larger ships, giving you time to observe their tactics." Stone looked at her crew, seeing expressions that ranged from thoughtful to predatory. These were people who had volunteered specifically because conventional tactics had failed, and now they were being asked to hide behind conventional tactics while they failed again. "Negative, Commander Zarthus. We appreciate the offer, but we didn't travel 4,000 light-years to watch other people fight our battles." She turned to her weapons officer, Lieutenant Maria Santos, Roberto's daughter and possibly the only person in the fleet who had specifically requested assignment to the ship with the most experimental weapons. "Lieutenant Santos, what's our current loadout looking like?" Maria Santos grinned, an expression that suggested she had inherited her father's relationship with things that probably shouldn't exist. "We've got a full complement of experimental systems, ma'am. Reality anchors, quantum disruptors, consciousness bombs, and what Dr. Vasquez calls the stupid weapons." "Define stupid weapons." "Weapons designed by people who didn't know they were impossible when they built them. Probability cannons that fire mathematical equations at the target until reality gets confused and forgets the target is supposed to exist. Quantum uncertainty torpedoes that detonate into clouds of maybe. And my personal favorite, the stubbornness projector." Stone raised an eyebrow. "The what now?" "It projects concentrated human determination at the target. The theory is that entities operating on cosmic certainty might have trouble dealing with something that absolutely refuses to accept the concept of cosmic certainty." "Maria, That's either the most brilliant weapon ever devised or the most ridiculous. Why not both, ma'am? The tactical display lit up with proximity alarms as the Devourers closed to engagement range. The Galactic Concord fleet opened fire with weapons that could crack planets, energy beams that could ignite stellar cores, reality stabilizers that could lock local space-time into existence through sheer mathematical force. None of it worked. The Devourers simply absorbed the attacks, their forms shifting through dimensions that the weapons couldn't reach. Worse, they began to adapt, learning from each attack and becoming more resistant to similar tactics. Within minutes, the most advanced weapons in the galaxy were having no effect at all. "All Concord ships, this is Fleet Commander Zartes," came the strained voice over the communication system. The enemy is displaying standard adaptation patterns, rotating through secondary weapon systems. Cardin watched as the alien fleet shifted tactics with precision born of desperation, trying variations of attacks that had already failed in the hope that slight modifications might succeed where the originals had not. It was the behavior of civilizations that had exhausted their options and were now running through them again, hoping repetition might somehow change the results. "Lieutenant Santos," Stone said quietly, "prepare to fire the stupidest weapons we have." Simultaneously, the whole point of stupid weapons is that they don't make sense, right? So let's really commit to not making sense. Maria Santos's hands flew over her weapons console, activating systems that existed more in theory than in practice. "Stupid weapons array armed and ready, ma'am. Fair warning, I have no idea what's going to happen when we fire these things. If we don't know what's going to happen, then cosmic entities with perfect understanding of cause and effect probably don't know either." The UES Defiance opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed, using principles that violated several fundamental laws of physics, targeting enemies that were themselves violations of everything humanity understood about reality. The probability cannons fired equations for imaginary numbers at the lead devourer, mathematical concepts that describe things that couldn't exist hitting a target that existed too much. The quantum uncertainty torpedoes exploded into clouds of philosophical paradox, creating zones where reality couldn't decide what was supposed to be happening. And the stubbornness projector, a device that Dr. Vasquez had built mostly as a joke, began broadcasting concentrated human determination directly at the devourers, projecting the absolute refusal to accept defeat that had driven humanity to this point. The lead devourer stopped moving, not slowed, not redirected. It simply stopped, hanging in space as if it had encountered something it couldn't process. Its form, which had been shifting constantly between dimensions, stabilized into something that hurt less to look at directly. "What the hell?" Tanaka stared at her instruments, which were now reporting readings that seemed almost reasonable. "Ma'am, the lead devourer is confused? Define confused. It's not adapting to our attacks because it doesn't understand what it's supposed to adapt to. The probability cannons are hitting it with mathematical concepts that can't be processed by logical thinking, and the uncertainty torpedoes are creating localized reality where cause and effect operate on emotional principles rather than physical laws." Stone felt a grin spreading across her face, the expression of someone who had just discovered that the universe had a sense of humor after all. "Are you telling me we just defeated a cosmic horror by hitting it with concentrated irrationality?" The communication link crackled with the voice of Commander Zartes, carrying a tone that suggested their understanding of warfare was being fundamentally revised. "Human vessel, what did you just do?" "Our sensors are detecting reality distortions around the lead devourer, but the energy signatures don't match any known weapon systems. Commander Zartes, we just introduced them to the concept of fighting dirty. Your weapons try to defeat them through superior logic and advanced physics. Our weapons try to defeat them by being so completely illogical that logic itself gives up and goes home." Maria Santos called out from her weapons station, excitement clear in her voice. "Ma'am, the stubbornness projector is having some kind of feedback effect. The devourer isn't just confused, it's actually getting angry." "How can you tell?" Because it just started broadcasting what our translation system is rendering as cosmic-level frustrated cursing. Also, it appears to be trying to delete our ship from existence, but it keeps getting distracted by the probability equations we're hitting it with. Stone looked at the tactical display, where one cosmic horror was effectively having a temper tantrum while the other two were beginning to show signs of confusion as the chaos spread. The Galactic Concord fleet had stopped firing, apparently as confused by human tactics as the Devourers were. "All ships, this is the Defiance," Stone broadcast to both human and alien vessels. "We seem to have discovered that cosmic horrors with perfect logic have trouble dealing with imperfect logic applied with great enthusiasm. Recommend all ships switch to their most irrational weapon systems and start firing them randomly." The response from the Galactic Concord fleet was a moment of silence that spoke volumes about the difference between advanced civilizations and humanity's approach to problem-solving. "Commander Stone," Zarthus said finally, "did you just recommend that we abandon tactical doctrine in favor of random weapons fire? Jewish rational weapons fire. Big difference. Random implies there's no pattern. Irrational implies there's a pattern, but it's based on human-style thinking rather than mathematical certainty."
I do not understand the tactical theory behind human-style thinking.
"We just try things that seem like they might work, and when they don't work, we try something else. When we run out of things that might work, we try things that definitely won't work but might surprise everyone." Lieutenant Commander Tanaka looked up from her science station where she had been monitoring the Devourer's response patterns. "Ma'am, it's working. The second Devourer just tried to adapt to our probability cannons by becoming more logical, which made it more vulnerable to the uncertainty torpedoes. And the third one appears to be trying to understand why our stubbornness projector is effective, which is causing it to experience something our computers are translating as existential doubt." Existential doubt? It's starting to question whether it actually exists, or if it's just a really persistent bad dream someone is having. Stone laughed, the sound carrying across the bridge and somehow making the impossible situation seem manageable. "Are you telling me we just convinced a cosmic horror that it might not be real?" "That appears to be the case, ma'am. Also, the doubt is spreading to the other Devourers. They're starting to question each other's existence, which is causing some kind of cascade effect." The tactical display showed something that no military academy in the galaxy could have prepared anyone for. 3 cosmic horrors having what appeared to be an argument about whether any of them actually existed, while simultaneously being pelted with mathematical impossibilities and concentrated human stubbornness. "Commander Zarthus," Stone said into the communication link, "I strongly recommend your fleet begin firing whatever weapons you have that don't make sense. The more illogical, the better." "Commander Stone, we do not have weapons that do not make sense. All our weapons are based on rigorous scientific principles and logical tactical applications." "Then congratulations, you're about to learn why human engineering teams include people whose job it is to suggest really stupid ideas and see if they work." Stone turned to her weapons officer, Lieutenant Santos. "What else do we have that shouldn't exist?" Maria Santos consulted her inventory with the enthusiasm of someone whose childhood dream had been to fire impossible weapons at inappropriate targets. "Well, we've got the confusion rays, the irony torpedoes, and what Chief Engineer Santos calls the desperation cannon." "What does the desperation cannon do?" "We're not actually sure, but it was built by a team of engineers who were specifically told it was impossible to build, so they built it anyway out of spite. The working theory is that it fires concentrated what if at the target. Fire everything." The UES Defiance unleashed a barrage of weapons that violated more laws of physics than most civilizations had discovered, hitting the Devourers with concepts that ranged from theoretically impossible to outright offensive to reality itself. The confusion rays made the targets forget what they were supposed to be doing. The irony torpedoes hit them with the cosmic joke of being defeated by a species that didn't know it was impossible. And the desperation cannon fired pure human refusal to accept defeat, concentrated into a beam that hit the Devourers with the absolute certainty that there had to be a way to win this fight if they just kept trying. The effect on cosmic entities that operated on absolute certainty was immediate and devastating. All three devourers began to exhibit behavior that could only be described as having nervous breakdowns. All Concord ships, Stone broadcast, the enemy appears to be experiencing psychological difficulties. Recommend immediate, coordinated assault using your most irrational weapon systems. Commander Stone, we do not have irrational weapon systems. Stone sighed, recognizing the fundamental problem with fighting alongside civilizations that had spent millions of years perfecting logical solutions to logical problems. In that case, use your logical weapon systems in completely illogical ways. Fire them backwards, sideways, at random intervals, whatever it takes to be unpredictable. What followed was possibly the most bizarre battle in galactic history. The Galactic Concord Fleet, guided by humanity's tactical doctrine of try weird stuff and see what happens, began firing their sophisticated weapons in patterns that violated every principle of tactical science. They shot at empty space, fired weapons designed to affect matter at targets that weren't entirely material, and used reality anchors to stabilize regions of space that were perfectly stable to begin with. The Devourers' entities of perfect cosmic logic found themselves under attack by tactics that made no sense, implemented by civilizations that clearly understood advanced physics but had chosen to ignore it in favor of doing whatever seemed entertaining at the moment. Unable to adapt to attacks that followed no logical pattern, unable to predict strategies that weren't based on predictable reasoning, the cosmic horrors began to retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal, they simply started moving away from the battle zone with the speed of entities that had encountered something they couldn't process and wanted to be somewhere else as quickly as possible. All ships pursuit course, Stone ordered, watching three cosmic horrors flee from a combined fleet that was chasing them while firing weapons in patterns that resembled interpretive dance more than military tactics. "Ma'am," Tanaka called out, "the Devourers are attempting to retreat to hyperspace, but they keep getting distracted by the confusion rays. I think they're forgetting how hyperspace works." "Outstanding. Continue firing everything we have in the most illogical pattern possible." The battle ended not with the destruction of the Devourers, but with their complete psychological collapse. Three entities that had consumed entire star systems retreated into hyperspace while apparently arguing among themselves about whether the battle they had just lost had actually happened or was some kind of cosmic hallucination brought on by exposure to too much concentrated irrationality. The silence that followed their departure was profound, broken only by the quiet hum of ship systems and the distant sound of victory celebrations from the Galactic Concord Fleet. "Commander Stone," Zarthes said finally, their voice carrying a tone that suggested their entire understanding of warfare was being revised in real time. "We have been fighting the Devourers for months using every advanced weapon and tactical system at our disposal. You defeated them in 17 minutes using... what exactly did you use?" Stone looked around her bridge, where her crew was wearing expressions of satisfaction mixed with disbelief. They had just proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their courage, but their absolute refusal to let logic get in the way of necessity. "Commander Zarthes," she said, "we use the most powerful weapon in the human arsenal. The ability to look at a problem that can't be solved and solve it anyway by refusing to acknowledge that it can't be solved." "No," Stone agreed, smiling at the viewscreen where alien fleets were trying to process what they had just witnessed.
It's better than a weapon, it's an attitude, and apparently cosmic horrors that operate on pure logic have no defense against it.
She stood up from her command chair, looking out at a star system that was no longer under threat of erasure from existence. "Set course for the next Devourer incursion site, Lieutenant. If 3 of them couldn't handle concentrated human stubbornness, let's see how many it takes before they decide to find a galaxy with more reasonable inhabitants." The first battle was over, but the war had just begun, and across the galaxy, cosmic entities that had never known defeat were about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an unmovable species that had never learned the meaning of the word impossible. The war against the Devourers had evolved into something that military historians would later classify as aggressively educational. for cosmic entities that thought they understood the rules of existence. The UES Defiance hung in space above the crystalline capital world of the Zephyrian Empire, part of a fleet that now included not just the 5 original human ships but dozens of galactic Concord vessels whose crews had been retrained in the fine art of tactical irrationality. The sight would have been impossible to imagine 6 months earlier. Ancient alien civilizations taking lessons in warfare from a species that had been confined to a single star system until recently. Commander Stone stood in the war room of Zephyrian High Command, looking at a galactic map that showed the current state of the conflict, where once red indicators had marked Devour incursions spreading like cancer across the galaxy. Now there were blue markers indicating successful human-led defensive operations in growing zones of reclaimed space. The Korath sector reports complete clearance of Devourer entities, Admiral Zarthess announced, their crystalline features reflecting the satisfaction of someone who had rediscovered the meaning of victory. They had been promoted after the first battle, largely because they had been the quickest to understand that working with humans meant abandoning everything they thought they knew about logical warfare. Commander Elena Vasquez, recently arrived via the second wave of human reinforcements, examined the tactical reports with the expression of a scientist whose theories had been proven in the most spectacular way possible. The Devourers keep trying to adjust to our attacks, but since our attacks are based on creative irrationality rather than logical patterns, they have nothing to adapt to. It's like watching a chess master try to play against someone who doesn't know the rules and keeps moving pieces based on how pretty they look, added Lieutenant Commander Tanaka, who had become the unofficial liaison between human tactical doctrine and alien strategic planning. General Morrison, the grizzled commander of the human ground forces, pointed to a cluster of indicators near the galactic core. The real problem is here. Intelligence suggests the Devourers are massing for a coordinated assault on the core worlds. If they take out the galactic government centers, they can destabilize the entire Concord. Stone studied the tactical projection, watching as probability calculations showed various scenarios for defending the core worlds. Every simulation showed the same result. Even with human tactical innovations, the sheer number of Devourers gathering for the assault would overwhelm any conventional defense. "How many ships do they have committed to the assault?" she asked. "Current estimates suggest approximately 300 Devourer entities, all of them larger and more complex than anything we've encountered so far," Admiral Zarthess replied. "Our combined fleet numbers barely 50 vessels, and while human tactical methods have proven remarkably effective, we are still dramatically outnumbered." Chief Engineer Roberto Santos, who had been quietly working on something at a portable workstation, looked up with the expression of someone who had either solved an impossible problem or was about to suggest something that would give everyone nightmares. "What if," he said slowly, "we stop thinking about this as a numbers problem and start thinking about it as an engineering problem?" "Well, the Devourers operate by erasing things from existence, right? They unmake matter, energy, space, time, the works. But what if we gave them something that couldn't be unmade?" Dr. Vasquez frowned. "Roberto, the conservation of mass energy is pretty fundamental. You can't create matter that can't be destroyed."
"There's a difference." The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of what Santos was suggesting. It was the kind of statement that could only come from someone who had spent months working with technology that shouldn't exist and had developed a professional relationship with impossibility.
"Roberto," Stone said carefully, "are you suggesting we build something that's too stubborn to be erased from existence?" "I'm suggesting we build something that's powered by being too stubborn to be erased from existence. A ship or a weapon, or maybe both, that draws its energy from the absolute refusal to stop existing." Lieutenant Maria Santos, who had inherited both her father's engineering brilliance and his relationship with physics-defying weapons, looked up from her own calculations. "Dad, that's either the most brilliant idea you've ever had or the most dangerous." "Why not both?" Admiral Zarthus's crystalline features shifted in patterns that suggested they were trying to process concepts that their species had no framework for understanding. "You are suggesting creating technology that operates on human principles?"
"I'm suggesting creating technology that operates on human principles," Roberto corrected.
The same principles that got us this far. The absolute conviction that problems exist to be solved, that impossible just means you haven't tried hard enough yet, and that the universe doesn't get to tell you no unless you let it. They were talking about building something that would either save the galaxy or teach everyone a very expensive lesson about the dangers of applying human engineering principles to cosmic-scale problems. "How long would it take to build?" she asked. "Well, that depends on how impossible you want it to be," Santos replied with the calm tone of someone who had made a career out of building things that shouldn't work. "A moderately impossible version, maybe 2 weeks. Something really impossible that could take a month. And the really impossible version would be capable of what exactly?" Santos grinned, an expression that had preceded some of humanity's greatest achievements and most spectacular failures. The really impossible version would be capable of convincing the Devourers that their entire approach to existence is fundamentally flawed, then offering to teach them better ways to exist. You want to build a ship that can convert cosmic horrors to a different philosophy of existence? I want to build a ship that can look at cosmic horrors and say, you could be doing this whole existence thing so much better, and then prove it by being so aggressively, enthusiastically alive that they start questioning their entire approach to consuming reality. The silence that followed this statement was broken by Dr. Vasquez's quiet laughter. "Roberto, that's not a weapon. That's not even a ship. That's a philosophical argument powered by human stubbornness and armed with the absolute conviction that existence is better than non-existence." Exactly. And if there's one thing humans are really good at, it's winning philosophical arguments through sheer persistence and the refusal to admit when we're wrong. "You cannot possibly be considering this." Stone looked at the galactic map where 300 devourer entities were preparing to erase the heart of galactic civilization from existence. She thought about the impossible journey that had brought humanity to this point, the technologies they had built, the victories they had achieved, all based on the simple principle that impossible problems were just problems that hadn't been solved yet. "Admiral," she said finally, 6 months ago my species had never left their home solar system. 3 months ago we were told that defeating the Devourers was mathematically impossible. Last week we taught cosmic horrors to experience self-doubt. At this point, building a ship powered by philosophical stubbornness seems like the next logical step. That is not logical. No. Stone agreed cheerfully. It's not, which is exactly why it's going to work. The construction of the UES Absolutely Not took place in the orbital shipyards above Zephyria Prime, built by a combined team of human engineers who specialized in impossible projects and alien technicians who were still learning to think irrationally. The ship's design violated so many principles of physics that the blueprints had to include warnings about potential side effects of prolonged exposure to the engineering specifications. It was simultaneously the most advanced and most ridiculous vessel ever built. The hull was constructed from materials that had been convinced they were indestructible through repeated exposure to human determination. The engines ran on a combination of exotic matter and concentrated optimism. The weapon systems fired philosophical arguments so compelling that targets forgot they were supposed to be fighting and started questioning their life choices. Most unusual of all was the ship's central core, a quantum consciousness matrix that had been programmed with the complete collected works of human philosophy, literature, and motivational speeches, then taught to apply these concepts to the problem of cosmic-scale existence. Lisa Chen, who had been brought in to design the ship's AI system, stood in the main assembly bay watching technicians install what might have been the first artificial consciousness specifically designed to argue with cosmic entities about the benefits of existing. "Status report?" Commander Stone asked, joining her at the observation window. "Well, the good news is that the ship's AI has achieved consciousness and is very excited about the concept of existence. The bad news is that it's developed opinions about everything and won't stop trying to convince the construction crew that they could be living more fulfilling lives. Is that going to be a problem?" Only if you consider having a ship that gives unsolicited life advice to everyone it meets a problem. Also, it started composing poetry about the beauty of not being erased from existence. The poetry is actually quite good, which is somehow more disturbing than if it had been terrible. Stone watched through the window as engineers worked to install the final components of humanity's most ambitious project yet. A ship designed to defeat cosmic horrors through the power of aggressive positivity and philosophical debate. How long until it's ready? We're just running final tests on the existential argument projectors and making sure the philosophical guidance systems are properly calibrated. And you're confident this will work? Dr. Chen considered the question seriously. Commander, I'm confident that we've built a ship that embodies everything that makes humanity unique in the galaxy. Our absolute refusal to accept that some problems can't be solved, our tendency to try impossible solutions with great enthusiasm, and our complete inability to let logic get in the way of doing what we think is right. She pointed to the ship where technicians were making final adjustments to systems that shouldn't exist. Whether that will be enough to convince 300 cosmic horrors to reconsider their approach to existence, well, we're about to find out. The test flight of the UES Absolutely Not was scheduled for 2 days before the projected Devourer assault on the core worlds. The ship launched from Zephyrian orbit with a crew of volunteers who had specifically requested assignment to humanity's most experimental vessel, guided by an AI that had spent the previous week composing inspirational speeches about the importance of staying positive in the face of cosmic adversity. Ship status report. Stone requested from the Bridge of the Defiance, where she was monitoring the test flight from a safe distance that the physics department had calculated to be probably far enough away if something goes catastrophically wrong, and somehow managed to convey the impression of someone who had never encountered a problem they couldn't solve through sufficient enthusiasm. This is the UES Absolutely Not, and I have to say, existing is absolutely fantastic. Systems are all green, crew morale is at unprecedented levels, and I'm detecting several opportunities for philosophical discourse with local. When the galaxy pleaded for champions, only humans answered the call. HFY Sci-Fi Story.